ish. I'm live as I recorded on the Liam Scheff Show. It is Sunday, the 10th of May. I turned 44 in 20 days. In 2 weeks. I turned 44 in 2 weeks. Oh shit. Oh my God. I'm writing my new book. It's called The Oil Alarm. The oil decline was prefigured. The oil decline was prefigured. The oil decline was prefigured. The oil decline was prefigured in policy papers put forward by the major oil companies, by Dick Cheney at Halliburton in '99, and by President Bush's neoconservative advisory team at Rice University. Let's look at that. In the meantime, go buy my book. It's official stories. It tells you all about 9/11. Oil gets a hefty mention. But now it's all about the oil because we're running out of the cheap stuff, the good stuff. We're running out of the good stuff. Never mind cheap. We're running out of the good stuff. Like the good stuff, you drill through a layer of caprock on top, and then you'd be in this sponge of sandstone. And it had been pressurized for a long time, at least 10 days. Probably millions of years. And the stuff just exploded up and out. And you get 100-foot geysers of oil for days. And then it would calm down and you'd pump it. And you'd pump it for years. And there was a tiny decline rate. I mean, like each well would have like a 2% per year decline rate. And you could just pump more wells in the aquifer. Well, it wasn't an aquifer. The field was big. And again, like an aquifer, it's not like an underground lake. And maybe I thought that there was an underground lake of oil when I started doing this research, because we don't learn about this in school. We should learn about this in school, but we don't. Instead, we learn that George Washington chopped down Abraham Lincoln with a cherry tree, and the Civil War ended because peace and love happened. Martin Luther King was great, but one bad guy shot him. Just one bad guy. And the government is on our side, and the Vietnam War was just a kind of a whoops, and we probably shouldn't have done that. But then, then there was ABBA, and then Madonna came in the 80s, and everything's been fine since then. And then there was Bill Clinton, and we didn't like him, but we did because he had sex, and that was the big deal. It wasn't, international trade, which really is international serfdom, was being instituted all over the globe. So that eventually we could all be cappuccino servers and Walmart executive employees, serfs, live on the Walmart plantation, bring in genetically modified rat feces from China. But way back in 2001, March, by the James Baker think tank at Rice University, eventually handed over. No, I'd written that it was handed over to Foreign Affairs, but it wasn't. It was taken in by the Foreign Advisory Committee to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I think. Anyway, it was a big deal, and it had the ears of everybody in Washington at that point. It was a big, big, big honking deal. And it starts kind of like this. For many decades now, it's written in 2001 in March. I don't know if you remember 2001. It was a great year. I was taking a statistics class in college. For many decades now, that's right, I'm 44. I returned to college. I returned state. Go to the city college and go to state. Why pay money to be lied to? For many decades now, but I was studying music and language. For many decades now, the United States has been without an energy policy. Really? I didn't know that in 2001, that they knew that the United States had been without an energy policy, except using every bloody drop of oil that could. The world is currently, in 2001, precariously close to utilizing all of its available global oil production capacity, raising the chances of an oil supply crisis with more substantial consequences than seen in 3 decades. That would bring us back to 1971. 3 decades. Really, they mean 2.7 decades. They mean 1973. What happened in 1973, you ask? Well, the United States supported Israel in a kind of a war that it was waging, and didn't support the Arab states, in which Israel is plopped down in between without really any thought to how a small group of Jews survive among Muslim Arabs. It's kind of as though somebody decided to politically put them there to create as much havoc as possible in the international scene, to constantly reinvigorate a desire to have the Western powers in the middle of the oil patch. I mean, because the Jews, were living in Europe, and I mean, why would you just put them in, right? But never mind. The world is currently precariously close to utilizing all of its available oilable production capacity. These limits mean that America can no longer assume that oil-producing states will provide more oil. What? I don't understand that sentence. Why can't Americans assume that? The American people need to know, you're on a need-to-know basis, that about this situation, and be told as well that there are no easy or quick solutions to today's energy problems. I don't understand what you said. I'm an American. Wait a second. Did you say there are no easy or quick solutions to today's energy problems? Can I have a mocha cappuccino with that? Strategic Energy Policy Challenges for the 20th Century report of an independent task force sponsored by the James A. Baker III, an Institute for Public Policy of Rice University, and here it is, the CFR Council on Foreign Relations. It was not, I still think it was published in Foreign Affairs, but it's essentially fed to the Council on Foreign Relations. In other ways, this was sent from the Capo di Due Capi to all the important people in the oil business, including the co-signatories of the Project for an American Century. Clear that in order to motivate Americans to do what's in their best interest in terms of having oil, to do what is required in terms of having oil, we needed to be motivated by a kind of new exciting event, maybe a Pearl Harbor-ish kind of thing. Just a little Pearl Harbor. Yeah, you Americans, you're so lazy you won't do anything unless you are attacked. So, continuing, the government will need to increase its vigilance and be prepared to deal with sudden supply disruptions. The situation is, the consequences of inaction could be grave. The situation is, by analogy, what situation? The situation of running out of oil. Like traveling in a car with broken shock absorbers at very high speeds. There are no easy, overnight, and politically attractive solutions to the country's or the world's infrastructure and supply problems. Say the kings of the world, James Baker, I'm going to bet Cheney weighed in here. Rumsfeld probably did. Wolfowitz probably did. But these are, you know what? I take that back. These are independent oil guys. Matt Simmons was in on this talk. So this is coming to us from oil advisors who worked in the business, who didn't have a political axe to grind until a little bit later. We'll get to that. There are no easy, overnight, and politically attractive solutions to the country's or the world's infrastructure and supply problems. There is no place, at home or abroad, where enough oil or gas can be developed fast enough to moderate prices in the next 6 to 12 months. There is no cost-free way to allow unrestricted energy and simultaneously safeguard the environment. Oh. Really? I mean, fracking's not good. There are no overnight solutions to the energy supply and infrastructure bottlenecks facing the nation and the world. Let's talk about those bottlenecks. U.S. energy independence is not attainable. Quoted, Strategic Energy Policy Challenges for the 21st Century. Co-authored by, whole lot of folks at Rice University. We're Texans. Jesus saves. Gay, I never thought about that. Honey, could you shave? Could you put on a man's wig? No. Take that, gay Texas. There are no easy, overnight, and politically attractive solutions to the countries of the world's infrastructure and supply problems. There are no cost-free ways to allow unrestricted energy and simultaneously safeguard the environment. It was fracking, of course, that saved America. It was fracking that saved America. And when did it save America? It saved America a year and a half ago. Fracking, which began in earnest after the collapse of the housing market. You know, where people got houses that they couldn't afford. But really, what happened and what motivated the collapse of the housing market was the fact that we weren't getting as much oil. The world was in decline. And because we didn't have as much free stuff to pave all of the nonsense that we want to do, you know, to make more movies in which... Isn't every movie about cars? You know, like there's somebody says 3 words and then they get into a vehicle and then they drive and it's exciting and dramatic and then they go somewhere. Movies are about cars. I mean, Transformers is just blatantly about cars, but, you know, just find any movie that's popular, even a drama, you know, and the most dramatic stuff is happening. Like they have to get into a car, they slam the door and they go somewhere. So our whole society, even the arts, are about cars. Fracking came about after, I think, 2008. I mean, the technology had been there. It was a way to side drill, to loosen up old wells, or to do tests for geological... I know, I got to look that up. But I know it had been around. I know it had been around probably since the 50s, maybe in the 40s, as a method. And then parts of it were developed a little bit later, and then they were assembled. And when the price of oil was finally high enough, and that happened, of course, when would the price be high enough? When every country in the world was pumping a little bit less. Even though they didn't want to be pumping less, they were pumping a little bit less because they weren't finding anything new. And so they were slowing down a little. Well, we're not finding new. We don't want to deplete what we have. You know, we just have this one cash cow. All right, so let's push the price up a little. So the price went up, and these Americans, you know, the T. Boone Pickens of the world, said, we can drill sideways down under the earth. There are 1 trillion barrels of oil under America. America, if we just blow up the top of the country and push all the people away, maybe into one ocean or another, we can melt the whole continental subshelf and get oil out of it and export that as liquid natural gas and oil. Okay? I know what I said. I understand that liquefied natural gas is something else, but it comes out of the same shale. So they do this tight shale mining, this fracking, right? And they explode oil out of it with water, and they explode gases out of it, and they collect them. We'll get into the gas thing in a second. So they started fracking, and then guess what? They started getting a little bit of fracked oil, and then the guy named Josh Fox, I think, made a movie called Gasland, and I went, Jesus God, you got to be kidding me. And then he made Gasland 2, and everybody said, well, you know, there's more oil now, so, you know, why are we worried about a little bit of water? Why are we worried about the environment? You know, I mean, actually, the market takes care of everything. The market's our hero. The market's our friend. The market's not a psychotic serial killer. The market's not a narcissistic punk who doesn't care about anything but what it can gain. The market doesn't just represent all of our worst qualities. I mean, the market isn't just there representing all of our most narcissistic, selfish qualities. Of course it's not. I mean, it's there. It represents our higher functioning. The market represents our superego. The market represents not our id, not just stuff we want to put in our mouth and shove in every orifice because it just feels good. The market isn't the thing that the market isn't the thing we want to throw on the bed and roll around in like dirty, dirty money. The market is I got it backwards. The market is all of those things. The market isn't our superego. The market isn't our conscience. The market isn't our most noble qualities. The market is the place that we go to say, what can we get for it, and how much can we get from this country, and can we just sell it over here? The market says, oh, you don't eat this fish in Sweden? You don't eat this fish in Wisconsin? Well, why don't we sell it to the Chinese? Here, you Chinese, you take it, okay, you buy it, and then you know what you should do? You should fry it and bread it and sell it back to us. Yeah, that's the market. So we get to ship things from Sweden, Norway, Minnesota. We get to ship those over to China because people can fillet them there and then send them back in little frozen boxes and sell them to kids. Hey, kids eat free. Have some of this Chinese fried Scandinavian shit. That's the market. The market is a whore. The market doesn't have any moral values. It has no moral compass. The market has all of our worst qualities. The market is all of our worst qualities, all of our worst intentions. That is what the market is. That and nothing but. The market is not a hero. It is all of our worst, most shallow compulsions, compunctions. It is all of our deficits piled high. It is our inability to think to the next day. And here are some people thinking to the next day. There are no overnight solutions to the energy supply and infrastructure bottlenecks facing the nation and the world. What's a bottleneck? Drill, baby, drill. We just think that we can just get as much out of the ground. But you pull it out of the ground and then you put it into the car. It's not what happens. It only comes out of the ground at a certain rate of speed because oil is, even light sweet crude is relatively thick. And it's not in a swimming pool underground, like I might have thought at one time. We're all told that there are pools of oil. Well, they're not pools. It's a hard sponge. It's an unsqueezable, brittle rock sponge. And when I say sponge, you would just look at it like rock, but there are pores in it, and the oil seeps through, and sometimes there are cracks and fissures, and it flows. Then the borehole is made, and the well, everything facing that, the oil flows into it. And those rocks are under so much pressure from above that the stuff literally explodes upward. But then you have to pump it. Then the pressure is released and you have to drill more holes. And then the stuff oozes in and you have to use a pump. And you have to use gas to run the pump. So you're putting oil into the oil field. You're running a gas pump to pull stuff out, diesel pump. A series of pumps and returns, and you got to push mud down sometimes when you're drilling so that you equalize pressure so you don't have a collapse of the thing. All the rock around will just push the hole closed. And you got to somehow drop the cement pipe down the thing, which cracks. But they do that. For fracking, they do it. They imagine that you can actually put a pipe in underground and it's not going to crack. Of course it cracks. They all crack. They know that. Bottlenecks. How much can you get out of the ground? Well, the ground can only produce so much at a time. So you get impatient. You start drilling more. So you have more holes. Well, it doesn't increase it increases the rate of speed for a little while, but then it doesn't. You just have to keep sucking, pulling. I know what that sounded like, but you just keep doing it. You keep using the pump. You're pulling the stuff out. You're pulling it up. And then it gets a little slower, so you drill again, you infill, you drill between the two holes that you drilled, and you find that there's not as much oil there because you've really drained a lot of it on both sides. Well, then you get creative, and you put a steam injector, you put a long hose of some sort. I got to look up exactly how they do it, I know, but I'm imagining it's a long metal thing, and you pump in hot steam, and you melt some of the viscous stuff at the bottom. You want it to be more fluid so you can pump it because the stuff at the bottom is thicker. Or you pump in CO2 gas, which pushes it out of the pores. I know, our friend CO2. You actually pump in CO2 gas and it pushes it out of the pores. Or you pump in, I already said steam. What else? CO2? Oh, what about water? Of course, because oil floats on. Right. So you drill deep and you start pumping in water, hoping that is as much as you can under the thing. So maybe you want to drill deep and put an explosive and crack, and you start pushing the thing up with water. Who's been doing that? Well, the Saudis have. The Saudis have been doing that for a long time. And their great Ghawar field has been pumping 30 to maybe 40% water. It was reported that it was pumping 30% water sometime in 2004. I mean, that they pump in so much water that when they pump oil, you're pulling out 30% water. And, 70% oil. Well, maybe now they're down to 50% oil and 50% water. Anyway, that's how they kept the pressure up. That's how they've kept the pressure up. There is no cost-free way to allow unrestricted energy use and simultaneously safeguard the environment. We can blow up this whole country. As it is, national solutions alone cannot work. Politicians still speak of U.S. energy independence, while the United States is importing more than half of its oil supplies, they said, in 2001. Well, by 2005, we were importing 60% of our oil supply. 70. 65, something like that. Indeed, the U.S. imports almost 500,000 barrels of Iraqi oil a day, they said, in 2001. Now, in 2001, Iraq was a dictatorship, but I suppose it was somewhat sovereign in that sense. It was its own thing. It was an Iraqifornia. Now the paper takes a turn, and I'm sensing some of the neocons, Rumsfeld, Cheney et al., Wolfowitz, had a hand in the next bit. Over the past year, this is Liam Scheff. You're listening to the Liam Scheff Show. Please buy my book, Official Stories. We detail the 9/11 excitement. You can follow all of it in Chapter 4. Chapter 3 will set the political... Chapter 1 and 2 will set the political landscape. Chapter 3 will talk about the previous big deal, which was JFK. And Chapter 4 is 9/11. Then we take a sharp turn, go into vaccines, HIVology, and a number of other issues. Big Bang, Shakespeare, plate tectonics, the Earth is growing and shrinking at exactly the same rate of speed. Really? Okay. That's a good one. Whatever. You can think it. You can make it happen in an animation. But, yeah. And I think we even touch on Darwinism. And the world doesn't work by Darwinism. I mean, things evolve, but not the way that people think they do. The universe is just such an interconnected electromagnetic thing that to say that the what we consider the least complicated thing, RNA and DNA, are so complicated that we can't remake them, no matter how hard we try, and we don't even understand them. And without those, you don't have life. So let's be honest. All of this started somewhere else. Life here started out there. For many decades now, I was saying. Now let's get to the exciting conclusion. Oil, over the past year, Iraq has effectively become a swing producer, turning its taps on and off when it has felt such action was in its strategic interest to do so. So if you don't know what a swing producer is, hi, I'm a swing producer, they just told you. A swing producer is somebody who turns their taps on and off to maximize or minimize, gain or loss. Saudi Arabia is the swing producer of the world. When the price goes too high, they'll pump less. They'll pump more to reduce the price. When the price goes too low, they'll pump. I got that backwards. When the price goes too low, they'll produce less to raise the price. When the price goes too high, they'll pump. No, when the price... Come on, do it with me. When the price goes too high, they want to reduce supply. They want to increase supply to lower the price. So when the price comes too high, they pump more. When the price goes too low, they pump less because they want to decrease supply. I know. Market. The market's a whore. Bitter perceptions in the Arab world that the United States has not been even-handed in brokering peace negotiations between Israel and Palestine have given political leverage to Iraq's Saddam Hussein to lobby for support among the Arab world's populations. Now this report talking about oil supplies goes like this. The United States should conduct an immediate policy review toward Iraq, including military, energy, economic, and political diplomatic assessments. In some measures, concessions will have to be made that will impinge on certain local environmental goals, states' rights, Middle East policy, economic sanctions policy, Russia policy, and hemispheric and international trade policy. Strategic energy policy challenges for the 21st century. Wait a second. You're saying that because Iraq holds some oil and influences other Arab states, we have to make an assessment including what we do in the hemisphere? Hemisphere is a big word. I'm feeling a lot of space right there. I feel a lot of wiggle room in hemisphere. And I believe that we might have done so. Energy infrastructure can be rebuilt and expanded rapidly only if government actively facilitates private sector decision-making and investment. Hello, Halliburton. It is equally important that the public understand the environmental and public health consequences of unfettered energy consumption. The government should take a leadership role in fostering such understanding. I believe they did that for 1 second. America's addicted to oil. Let's invade. America's invaded. America got an oil addiction. America. Hydrogen economy. America. Remember that guy? That funny guy with the speech thing? Funny words, malapropisms. I don't know how hard it is to put food on a family. Remember? 8 years. No? Yeah. That was Strategic Energy Policy Challenges for the 21st Century. A report from the Rice University Baker Institute and the Council on Foreign Relations. Sounds impressive, and it is. It was just nary 6 months later. It was just a wee bit of time later, when I believe it was 19 Arabs who liked pornography and cocaine drove a few airplanes into things in the United States, and they had to then go overseas and blow everybody up for freedom and democracy. 9/11. 9/11. It's what's for dinner. 9/11. You can't say no to 9/11. 2,700 plus Americans died in the World Trade Center bombings, and then millions of people have been killed overseas. And don't tell me that they haven't. We don't even do the Iraqi death toll anymore, do we? Afghani death toll. This is Liam Scheff on The Liam Scheff Show. Please support independent journalism and research. I am working on my new book, The Oil Alarm, which tells us that, indeed, oil seems to be a limited resource, and the good stuff is gone. What we're going to have now is the dirty. See you in a minute. And you're listening to the Liam Scheff Show on UCY TV. It's a UCY special. Official stories exist to protect officials. I was writing in about 2008 or 9, and I scratched my head. I made a little comic that said, official stories exist to protect officials. A little bit of internet artwork. It came to me. I was thinking about the Roman Empire. I was studying the Middle Ages. I'd been studying the Middle Ages. I'd been studying the late Roman. I'd been studying the late Middle Ages into the beginning of the Renaissance, into the beginning of Reformations, etc., etc. And it occurred to me that anything that came through the king's scribes, you couldn't trust. They always say, well, this came through the authorized version. This was what the king wanted to be said in his official biography. Well, you have to understand that, Suetonius was, writing in favor of some Caesars and not in favor of others. So Augustus gets a nice break, and, Otho and Tiberius, they really get run up the flagpole. Not that it wasn't true that he was kind of a big perv, but, you can't quite trust Suetonius, can you? So there are all these historians that you can't trust because they always have their favorites, and they're always trying to do somebody a favor. Well, why, I thought, do we trust any official historian at all? Because, they're writing in favor of the king that they're serving. Official stories exist to protect the king who's in power. The official. Okay, official. There's an official historian, there's a court historian. Why do you trust them? The official stories exist to... why do we really trust, these tell-alls that come out about, these sort of like kid glove, tell-alls that come about a couple years after something. They're just all publicity. Like any book about Hillary Clinton is just publicity for Hillary Clinton. I suppose there have been some that really got under her skin and went for it. But for the most part, anything that comes through the newspaper is an official story. And I thought, well, why did official stories exist to protect these people in charge? Okay, skeleton key to history. Official stories exist to protect officials. And when I had that, everything was much easier. It was much easier not to be confused. And it was a shortcut. It was a skeleton key. And I wrote the book. And I wrote the book to correct all the giant fibs that I had to meld myself from that, we're taught growing up in school that we just sort of ignore. And they're all in the book, right there for you to buy on Amazon.com. See you in a second. And you're listening to The Liam Scheff Show on UCY TV and Truth Frequency Radio. You can support independent journalism by buying my book, Official Stories, or The Truth About Love, which is a pithy little novel. Pithy. No. It's another word. I don't have a lisp that I know of. That's on ebook. Official Stories. Truth About Love will be on paperback in probably by the end of May or probably second week of June when I'm editing the current book. I will take a break and reformat it for paperback and make sure that it's okay, and then it will go out, and all the lovely people who bought the ebook can have the pretty paperback with the pretty cover and all that kind of stuff. And that's a fun, happy, sexy little book. But Official Stories is a book that will probably set you to thinking about the 20th century and how we got there. The book I'm working on now, The Oil Alarm, will tell you why we have to relocalize, why the jig is up, why we have to stop dancing this particular dance on the surface of planet Earth, and find ourselves back in neighborhoods. Find ourselves collecting water, building ponds to hold water locally, building gardens in every yard, building square-foot raised bed gardens in the back and front yards of every house along Main Street and along the suburban tracts. The suburbs will die if they're not producing food, if we don't turn the suburbs into towns. And if the suburbs are not manageable as towns, they will not exist. We get our food from too far away. Our food comes from a place called Monsanto Land. And Monsanto Land is in China, and it's in Wisconsin, and it's in Iowa and Illinois. It's very far away unless you're in those places. And even then, your food from Monsanto Land still goes through a production facility that doesn't just bring it to your house from the field. Not that you'd want to eat that stuff from the field. It goes through a lot of processing so that it becomes the things that you're used to. Lifesavers and Kellogg's Corn Flakes and Tyson chicken. Yeah, your soybean and your corn goes into the animals that you eat, and that glyphosate is accumulated in their bodies. That's what happens. Okay, so we needed to get into Iraq, but why Afghanistan, you might be saying? Because I don't know if you remember this, but we actually went into Afghanistan before we went to Iraq. And it wasn't a we. It was you're either with us or against. You're either with us or against us. You're with us or you're against us. Right? That stuttering idiot who was president for 8 years. You're with us or against us. I know how hard it is to put food on the America. Energy freedom. We're free. America's addicted to oil. Hydrogen economy. George, go out and say hydrogen economy. When I tap my leg, say hydrogen economy. Hydrogen economy. Beta kitten. Come on. So here's an interesting point of view. It's Colin J. Campbell. And Colin J. Campbell is a petroleum geologist, exploration manager for air and energy in Ireland, works as a petroleum geologist with BP, Texaco, FINA, and Amoco, consultant to Shell, Esso, and independent governments. Went on to found the ASPO, no, the Association for the Study of Peak Oil, not what you think I said. And he gave a number of interesting interviews in the early 2000s, and here's one. Pause. While I find it, I know it wasn't exactly smooth. That brings us to the I'm going to read what he said. That brings us to the Caspian region, said Colin J. Campbell, founder of the Association for the Study of Peak Oil. I believe this is a 2005 interview. It could be 2008. Let me see. Global Vision, global.org, Big Picture TV. 2002. Wow. You gotta be kidding. Look how on it this guy was. This Global Vision interview by Michael O'Callaghan was shot at the Tipperary Institute, Ireland in 2002. They say all rights reserved, so here are your rights. I'm going to read this, and this is Colin Campbell. This brings us to the Caspian region, one of the world's oldest producing basins. Wait. Hold on a second. Let's go to the question first. But won't the amount of time it will take to use up the remaining supply be much shorter, especially because of increasing consumer demand in China and other developing countries whose populations are rapidly expanding? In other words, the oil that's left won't last as long as the experts say because of the increase of countries who are now building the Western model. Here's Colin J. Campbell. Well, the United States depends on foreign imports, mostly from the Middle East. We used to depend, by the way, on Mexico, and we still do in the Gulf, but the Cantrell field, one of the great oil fields of the world, declined rapidly. Why did it decline rapidly? Remember this isn't Campbell anymore. Remember in the first half of the show, we talked about all that, adding CO2, pumping in steam, all these other things. That makes the well decline faster. So instead of a gradual 2-3% decline, you end up with a 6-8% decline, or worse. Now add 8 plus 8 plus 8. That's 24. So within 3 years, you can have a total 25% decline in a field. And if the field's already on the decline, you have to add that to the existing decline, what it's already gone down. So let's say that the well's depleted 30% and it's not producing as quickly. And you know, by the way, that you don't start declining at 50%. You might start declining at 40 or 30 as it gets harder to pump, because the oil gets harder to pump as you go further down, because it's further away from the wellbore. Simple distance. It has to go through more rock. So you have to drill more, which is expensive, several $million per time you drill down into the rock like that. And then what? And then it's got more sulfur in it. It's got more metal in it. It's got more whatever in it. And so it's harder to pump. It's thicker. It's more viscous. It's no longer light sweet crude. It's medium grade crude, or it's heavy crude. It can be heavy. So once you start declining, you're in a race against geology. You drill more, you do all kinds of things, and you increase the rate of the disaster. Now, oil, you'll be able to pump oil out of there for a long period of time. But you'll pump less and less. Titusville, where oil was pumped in the 1850s, still produces a little bit of oil in a museum in Pennsylvania. Pints, a couple pints per day. Not quarts, not gallons, and not 42 gallons per barrel, and not hundreds of barrels, and not thousands or millions of barrels, which is what you need to get out of a field. But pints, nothing. Nothing that you could use, nothing you could sell. And they keep the thing open out of, I guess, duty of a museum, but you got to run the pump with, energy, diesel. Well, the United States, says Colin Campbell, depends on foreign imports mostly from the Middle East. It has long been official U.S. government policy that access to foreign oil is a vital natural interest, justifying military intervention where necessary. Yes, that's our energy policy. Up till now, this potential threat of military intervention was based on the fear of temporary interruptions, while some countries might stop exports for political reasons. But the situation has now changed because the U.S. is no longer facing just the prospect of temporary political interruptions. It's facing the iron grip of depletion. That means that not only is the United States depending on Middle East supply, but so is the rest of the world. China is desperately trying to increase its economy. It has aspirations to be a two-car family like everybody else. And China has been very thoroughly explored by the communists, albeit with rather primitive technology. But this was offset by the sheer level of work that they do to drill. They drill wells on 5-acre spacing. They drill thousands of wells very close together to compensate for the rather limited technology. In other words, instead of being able to explore with sonar and figuring out where the best spots are, they don't have that, so they just keep drilling closer and closer and closer together, much closer than they would in an American normal Western Saudi oil field until now. Now they're drilling, acres apart. Right next to each other, essentially, which isn't any good because, to put in a frac well, you're drilling down a half mile or so or more, and then you're drilling sideways a half mile or a mile. So you can't put them too close together, but the Chinese are. So the Chinese are going to be looking for access to the Middle East oil, and they are. And China is buying up all kinds of stuff in Africa and has been and owns it. The third world Africa, although their needs are small, they're also going to be wanting access. And under the principle of globalism, it's a tenet that the world's resources should be available to the highest bidder, which is clearly the United States at the present time. So we face a conflict, the first steps of which are already being unfolded in front of us. Access to these oil supplies, which are critical to the agriculture of this country, the United States, to their well-being and to their whole economy, our well-being, our economy, is moving from being just market-driven thing, which political incidents might be superimposed upon, to being limited by the iron grip of depletion. Now, what about Russia? Again, I'm reading from Colin J. Campbell's interview in 2002. Discovery in Russia peaked, and he's a 50-year petroleum geologist, he knows it all. Discovery in Russia peaked in the late 50s. They were quite efficient explorers because they were freed from the commercial criterion. In the West, we always had to drill wells on the basis of expecting them to deliver. In the Soviet Union, they could drill wells to get information, scientific, engineering data. They approached it really more logically. So discovery peaked there, and in the last days, the communists, they really raped the reservoirs. They overproduced them. Water entered, causing all sorts of damage to the reservoirs simply because of the desperate conditions they were in. Did I say that if you overpump a well, it depletes more quickly? That's what happens. After the collapse of communism, oil production just fell like a stone. Now, 10 years later, 2002, it's beginning to recover. They walked away from a lot of their operations, by the way. After the collapse of communism, the country really collapsed, and it's hard to keep up an infrastructure, an oil drilling and supplying, pipeline running and heating infrastructure. It's hard to do that when the basis of your economy has been depleted, because we lived in a networked economy. So if you lose a significant portion of your oil due to overproduction or a peak or a decline, you're also going to lose your manufacturing base. It's going to decline significantly. These things are so interwoven that to say that you just get to kind of do whatever you want. Oil declines, but that's fine because everything else goes on. It's not true. It's like saying that you haven't eaten for 3 days, but you're going to take a math test and you're going to be great at it. You're not, because your mental facilities or faculties are intrinsically interwoven with your energy supply. That's a decent way to put it. It's like saying you haven't eaten for 3 days, but you're going to go on a 10-mile walk. This is going to be a very painful walk, whereas if you've just had a really good meal and digested for 6 hours, you can go on a long walk, a long hike, and you're going to be okay as long as you bring more food and water. So you need the food and water along the way to supply all of the various things that are going in your body, the self-lubricating mechanisms, the fat that you need in your body, the carbohydrates that you need to make sugar, to make your ATP system work, the proteins that you need to fill in the deficits where you've, sort of cooked your muscles a little bit too much and they're degrading. So you need all of these things. Well, a system like the United States with a trucking network and a rail network needs oil to make this stuff work. And the Soviet Union with the trucking network and a train network, really a train network, would need enough oil and gas to make this work. And if they were overpumping, they'd have less. If they had severe political unrest, you might not be able to get people to go to work the same way. And there's another chink in your armor, weak link in your chain. So why has Russia recovered? Well, they peaked, but they hadn't run out. I think they made a couple discoveries, but they've certainly peaked since then, and they've been announcing that they're not going to have as much as they did. So they're on the decline. They have a lot of natural gas, and they're going to use it judiciously. They're going to sell it to whom they want to and not sell it to those that they don't want to. They're going to keep themselves in a natural gas economy much longer than probably we can. There's been a great amount of talk about, us having 100 years of natural gas, but that was immediately rescinded after examining the fact that the forecasts for this sort of thing were all based on the best wells. This is something that comes out of the oil industry. You can advertise on the, in the investor sheets. Let's say you have a well that produces really well, and you then say that that's the average over an entire region. But that's, like saying that you on your best day is the average of you your whole life. When the majority is you have a lot of very middling days and a lot of very bad days. So you on your best day is 10, 15%. That's 10, 15% of best days. And about 50, 60% of okay, and what's left, 85, 15, another 15% of the worst days of your life. Or maybe 20. So in the United States, they averaged the best wells as though they were the average wells, and the reality is that the average was about 50% and 80% less. So we don't have 100 years of natural gas. Nobody can really tell you, but it could be 30 at current usage rates. And if we run low on oil, they're going to use the remaining gas to fill in the oil gaps, which means that we'll have 15 years of natural gas left because it'll go quickly. That's the way it happens. And we're not very smart about it. We're not clever. We're not careful. And we're not being asked to conserve. We're being asked to be afraid of CO2. And, maybe CO2 is a problem and maybe it's part of a problem. But the problem is that the American government doesn't have the brain power or the will or the courage to say, look, what it said in that report, that Strategic Energy Policy Challenges, it said that the American government needs to tell people that we have to use a limited amount of this stuff, that we cannot live the way that we have lived. And I haven't heard that message coming through. I don't know if I've been missing it on Fox News, or CNN or PBS. I don't remember them coming on saying, actually, don't drive your cars today, and everybody has to carpool. And actually, cars are kind of going to go the way of the dinosaur. We're going to put electrified streetcars all over the world, all over the country, because that's the most efficient use of our energy. By putting in an electrical streetcar network in the major cities, and I know Manhattan has subways and people use them, but put an electric streetcar above ground too. Maximize traffic that way, or do it in, if that's a bad idea, do it in Miami to Fort Lauderdale to Boca Raton. Do it, screw Los Angeles, sorry, it's dead. Do it in any of the other major cities that don't have, or begin to extend the rail systems that are there by extending the rail longer into the suburban tracts to spare people 20-mile drives. Really, if we started building train systems and using them and demanding that people use them and putting an artificial tax on gasoline to make it more expensive for people who drove alone, that the answer would be that 4 of us had to fit in cars at all times. Well, that's uncomfortable. Well, sorry, that's the way I grew up. I mean, nobody drove alone all over the place. Gas was too expensive. We can do it, we can, but we're probably not going to until we absolutely have to. So let's get back to Colin Campbell. Do you understand what I'm saying, though? Do you understand this point? That there are two things. When you over-drill to get the remaining stuff out, you deplete the well faster. That happens all over the place. There's a codicil to that, and it goes like this. Oil on land, the big oil fields on land, were all discovered sometime between the 30s and the 50s, maybe the 60s. And then we found them all. Then they went, and those lasted the longest. Some of those are still performing, like Ghawar, the Ghawar field of Saudi Arabia, the largest in the world, still performing some 40 years into it. Those deplete the slowest. Then you go into shallow water, and you get a lot of oil there. Those deplete faster than the on land ones. Then you go to deep water. Those deplete faster still. Then you go to fracking, and those deplete in lightning speed, 50%, 60%, 70% in the first year, an average of 40% a year. Not 2%, but 40. Different animal, different game, short-term game, very risky game, polluting a lot of water for it. So, says Colin Campbell, they are now increasing production, talking about Russia, the former Soviet, making good what they would otherwise already have produced, but for the anomalous collapse at the end of the Soviets. So he's saying that the former USSR has now increased production for the last 10 years, and they're one of the exporters to the world. They went back to the fields that were in the beginning of a decline when the government collapsed and you couldn't get the work done, and everybody had to relocalize and everybody had to grow food or people would have starved. They got back on their feet, remanaged their energy sector, waged war on a couple local city states, a couple local former satellite states, Chechnya, etc., who were getting in the way of Pipelineistan and now are manhandling the remaining oil supply. So the former Soviet Union will be much better off than the United States. number one, they were never really decentralized. They were always centralized. Every major city lived on train lines. People in the rural area never got used to driving anywhere. You know, it's not like they all had cars. I mean, if they did, it was for emergency stuff, and you still had to rely on your local community environment or trains, not overland trucks, to get the majority of your food. Now, says Colin Campbell, this brings us to the Caspian region, one of the world's oldest producing basins, already known in the 1800s, middle of the 1800s. The Soviets had no particular reason or need to explore the offshore fields in the Caspian Sea. They didn't develop offshore rigs and platforms. It wasn't in their budgetary constraint. But when the Soviet Union fell, the place became available to Western interests. So you see, the Soviet Union collapsed, and then there's this Caspian basin. Well, let's go into the water there, say the major oil companies. There was a great enthusiasm for the Caspian end of the 90s, and the Western companies moved in. The United States government was partially misled by a great wave of optimism that overcame everybody, and they said, well, maybe the Caspian gives us an escape from the stranglehold of our dependence on the Middle East. So exploration started. He says in the far south there's an area shared between Iran and Azerbaijan, which is a deep basin, which is gas prone. So you make gas there. And BP, British Petroleum, has made quite a nice gas find there, but nothing too exceptional. Then east of Baku, the world's ancient oil capital, there's a narrow belt, which is the delta of the old Volga River. It runs eastward toward Turkmenistan, if you're trying to get there by plane or bird. And this has delivered some nice offshore fields, but nothing to make any huge difference to the world. But wait a second. They thought it was going to. Now get this. ExxonMobil, BP, Russia's Statoil, they'd all gone in and looked at it. But ExxonMobil pulled out of that offshore field that we were talking about along the old Volga River. Now, the really great interest, says Colin Campbell, lies further north, where in 1979, the Soviets made a very deep discovery at 4,000 meters of high sulfur oil. 16% sulfur at a place called Tengiz. This is very important because you begin to run into an understanding that oil drilling isn't something that you do in like an iPad game. You know, it's not like Civilizations or whatever. It's something you actually have to do. And you get guys out there who are essentially willing to be maimed and have limbs torn off and fingers and freeze or be drowned to do this work to get a better than average paycheck. Here it is. The Soviets didn't have the steel to deal with the high sulfur because it corroded the pipes. It's not this you just put a thing down and then you get the oil. High sulfur eats through the steel and the lines and the feed lines and the pipelines. So they didn't develop this field. Later Chevron came in and indeed with some difficulty is now producing quite a large field, about a 6 billion barrel field in a very deep structure, like an ancient reef. Later they found the most enormous offshore structure, 200 miles long by 50 miles wide, which looked like the Tengiz discovery. High sulfur, but a very deep, much bigger. If this had been full of oil, it might have contained 200 billion barrels, making it the world's largest oil field. Oh my God. So in the late 1990s, the Western powers thought that they had found a 200 billion barrel oil field, which would have been incredibly large, incredibly valuable, and really only produced about 30 billion barrels a year, times 6 would be 18, 180, 6.5. A 6.5 year supply. And again, you couldn't get that out in 6.5 years. It would take 20, 30 years to pump it. So you get a lot of it each year, but it wouldn't be enough to supply the world at what it was used to. But it would still be an incredible discovery, put a lot of fears to rest. So there was a great deal of hyperbole about this. And you can picture back in the think tanks of America and the Foreign Service departments and the military planners. These people seeing this great gem sitting there in the Caspian. Their interest shifted to how to get the damn stuff out. Since they are obviously not geologists, it was an assumption made that it was just there. The problem would be to export it and bring it onto world markets, which would help hold the price of oil down, which had been sneaking up year after year, by the way. So a lot of emphasis was given to the control of the Caspian area. Which is? Yeah. And oil must be the only reason anybody would wish to control the place, with a lot of discussion about different pipeline routes and so on. Many people see this strange Afghan war that developed not so long ago, after 9/11, as one of the factors involved. Though there may have been other motives as well, as it would be a rather convenient staging point. It is outside of the Russian orbit. It's kind of a no man's land up there. There may have been a thought that to control Afghanistan, which we're now abutting in the Caspian area, would indirectly give them control of Caspian oil, the pipelines and all the rest of it. It seems to have been one of the motivations that led to that event. What event? They have now drilled 3 wells in the huge Caspian field, 2002. They found that far from being a single huge structure containing 200 billion barrels, as it is hoped, it's made up of a bunch of different little oil reefs, little oil plays. Very deep, very high in sulfur, and maybe it's got between 9 and 13 billion barrels. Again, we use 30 billion barrels per year. Does that put it in perspective? Well, says Colin Campbell, it's still a very nice oil field. There's nothing wrong with such a thing. It's not going to make a big difference to oil supply, and in fact, BP and Statoil, who are partners in the venture, have pulled out. If you have a 13 billion barrel oil find and you pull out, it means that it's not worth it for political regions, for every other region, for the fact that it's politically unstable, that the sulfur content is high, that it's going to be too hard to refine and get anywhere, too hard to put in boats and then take to a refinery without those boats being military targets. You don't know. So he says the Caspian Sea was a kind of chimera, a hope that is not materialized. And one can picture the kind of momentum of strategic planning. They get the idea that this is some target that we should control, and the small fact that it doesn't have the booty that you think it does takes some time to sink into the square minds of the people doing this. We find that the Afghan war came to a driving stop. It didn't achieve very much. It caused the fall of a government. This bin Laden man they were supposed to be looking for was never found. And that's the case. It was never we stopped talking about bin Laden for 10 years. And now it barely hits the television screen at all. And then one day a guy showed up who we saw from the back, and we were told he died, and then we didn't see the body, and then he was thrown into the water, dead. So what happened next? We suddenly find that for no apparent particular reason, there is now a threat to invade Iraq, which stood next to the Caspian on the U.S. list of places with undiscovered potential. The cynic has some justification in saying, well, the first venture to control the Caspian failed. They moved up one step down to the list to control Iraq. One can picture a sort of committee, one can think of the Israeli committee there who say clearly that Iraq poses some kind of threat to Israel, so we'd like to counter that threat. We could see the oil lobby on the other side saying, yes, we desperately need to access the Iraqi oil. It would help us in our world supply situation. The United States is heavily in debt. It's a kind of virtual economy built on foreign inflows, and the whole event of September 11th, undermined world confidence in the superiority of the United States and the dominance of the dollar. The lobby who thinks about such matters might say, yes, it would be helpful for us to have a campaign somewhere to re-exert our world authority. The interwoven threads of different interests might lead the United States to this threatened invasion of Iraq. Interesting? Of course, this would be very simplistic because it's almost inconceivable that the United States could hold in perpetuity all of those people in subjugation. The Palestinians tell us they don't give up that easily, and oil installations are certainly easy targets for any kind of resistance. Now, why are we in Iraq? Why did we go into Afghanistan? We went in Afghanistan because this is Liam Scheff Show on Truth Frequency Radio and UCY. Join us next time. Please go buy my book.